celebrate with Christy this morning that she has been approved to be commissioned as a deacon in the United Methodist Church. And that will be in June at our annual conference. And our annual conference this year is only up in Manchester, so we're hoping we'll have a really good contingent of folks to attend and support Christy.
Praise the Lord.
Personally, I want to hear all about it, but we'll leave that for another time. So today, we are moving to more closely identify just what it is that the United Methodist Church says about homosexuality in its Book of Discipline. But before we get there, I want to just address three areas of what we might call misinformation or areas of stereotypical notions that people often have around homosexuality. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But for now, I'd like to begin with prayer, and then we'll proceed. Gracious God, we are truly thankful that you call each of us into ministry, and that there are some among us who you call into specialized ministries of service in the community as deacons and to ordained ministry as elders. And we are grateful for those who are able and willing to respond, "Here am I, Lord, send me." And we thank you for Christy and for her willingness to respond, and the Board of Ordained Ministries' approval of her to be commissioned. And we ask your richest blessing upon her. We also come to you with gratitude for the many in our church who are willing to respond, "Here am I, send me," but whom we say, "No, thank you." And we ask, O God, that you would be at work in our church to change that "no, thank you" into "yes, we welcome you to use your gifts as equally as others do." Guide us now, O God, in this time together. Give us your grace, give us wisdom, and give us the ability to listen to each other, to hear each other, and to respond in ways that honor you and each other as well. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Forgot to put my clicker on here, so do it. All right, so there are three areas that I just wanted to tentatively or address. One is this notion that there is such a thing as a gay lifestyle. You perhaps have heard someone say, "I have nothing against homosexuals, but I just don't like the gay lifestyle." When people say that, what is it that they're talking about? What is it that they are referring to? Paul?
Just stuff that makes them uncomfortable.
Okay, stuff that makes them uncomfortable. Is it more than that? Linda?
I think sometimes when people talk about the gay lifestyle, they're thinking of nightclubs and things like that, not thinking that anyone can do that kind of lifestyle or make a wonderful, happy, settled home.
Pat?
And they also think of what you see in Gay Pride Parade, the flamboyant stuff that you see in a lot of different places, but because it's a pride parade, it's outrageous rather than on a beach somewhere.
I think when people use that term, everyone obviously uses it in the same way, but I think there's a sense amongst some people, and I think it's changing and has changed, that homosexuals, especially homosexual men, have a tendency towards promiscuity, towards seeking sex in unseemly places like men's bathrooms and bars and the like. And we see that depicted a lot in a lot of television shows, and especially older depictions of homosexuality in movies and the like. I sent to you the tongue-in-cheek Huffington Post article about the gay lifestyle. And I think for many people, Pat and Pam might be able to affirm that the gay lifestyle is about as boring as our heterosexual lifestyles tend to be. Our lives on a daily basis are focused on all of the usual stuff, making a living, cooking dinner, getting to bed at a decent time, watching television, taking care of business. And that there's no such thing as a, quote, gay lifestyle that's really all that much different than heterosexual lifestyles. And I think the use of that term, thankfully, is not one that we hear as much. Another notion is that there are gay sexual predators who prey on young boys in particular. And one of the things that we have come to understand, first of all, is that sexual predation, sexual assault is not about sex. It's about violence, it's about assault, it's about dominance. But also what we have come to understand is that many of those who have been sexual predators are actually heterosexual men who are acting against their natural orientation. And that's been, I believe, verified time and time again. Are there homosexual sexual predators? Of course. Are there heterosexual sexual predators? Of course. We can out-shout them. They're making bread in the kitchen. I think we'll be fine. So, we just need to be careful not to make assumptions when it comes to sexual violence, sexual assault, that any one orientation is more guilty than another. So that's it. And then the third thing we hear about is can't homosexuals just change? There's a clip I saw this week from the Book of Mormon, which is a musical on, I don't know if it's on Broadway or it's a spoof really on Mormonism. And one of the clips has to do with just change, about homosexuality. And I guess the question we could ask ourselves, for those of us who are heterosexual, how easy do you think it would be for you to change to a homosexual orientation? Do you think you could do that? Probably not. But why do we think that homosexuals could change their orientation? The reality is that the conversion therapies that have been tried oftentimes are just inhumane. They're very harmful to people. They're trying to get them to do something that just can't be done. So this is just from the American Psychiatric Association Task Force on Appropriate Therapeutic Responses to Sexual Orientation. That is a mouthful. There are no studies of adequate scientific rigor to conclude whether or not such methods work to change sexual orientation. The long-standing consensus of the behavioral and social sciences and the health and mental health professions is that homosexuality and bisexuality are per se normal and positive variations of human sexual orientation. I believe many states have outlawed conversion therapy, and I think that's probably a very positive thing. So does anyone want to say anything about any of those three? Yes.
I just want to pick up on what Pat was saying about the flamboyance. I found myself about 25 years ago driving through Boston with my young daughter, and I got caught up in a gay pride parade. And this was long before you know, marriage and all that. And my daughter said, "What's that?" And there was a float coming down, and it had on it a big structure in the shape of an unmistakable penis. And it did not advance the cause. It turned me off. And I don't know what I said to my daughter. I probably, you know, just made something up. But, you know, things like that don't advance the cause.
I think we can all probably agree with that, Jerry, and yet at the same time, I think sometimes when people are put into a place where who they are is so attacked, and who they are told they shouldn't be, there's a tendency to, I'm not sure what the word is, but to just respond in ways that are outlandish, in ways that are flamboyant, in ways that just say, in your face, this is who I am, and if you don't like it, tough.
Yeah.
And I can understand that. Dan?
Just to build off that, I get what you're saying, but at the same time, as a gay man, I feel like the point of gay pride is not to be acceptable for the heterosexual population. The point of gay pride is to exactly what it is. It is gay pride. And if that makes you uncomfortable, I'm sorry.
And I appreciate having you say that, Dan. Thank you.
Please, can I make a comment here? That what makes me uncomfortable about the whole issue of how people see their fellow human beings is the fact that people try to live other people's lives for them. You know, it makes me so uncomfortable. I am sitting in to be part of this study because I have told myself that adult Sunday school is something I would like to be part of. But some of these discussions don't help me to continue to see church as that place that is supposed to really be about the interest of everybody and not have some people feel that they are discriminated against. So whatever views people hold as individuals, my prayer is that they don't allow such things to make church not to be church, because some of us were brought up to see church as a place where everybody belongs, where everybody should feel free, where everybody should, that is, advance God's cause and not man's cause. And so some of these things, I look at them as some people have, over the years, lorded it over others. And as time went on, others are really trying to push back on being lorded over. That's my own view.
Thank you, Nani. That's actually a good lead into what we really want to do today, because in my own sense is that there are individuals who, whether because they're convinced the Bible condemns homosexuality or because it is just so discomfortable to them, are never going to come to a place where they're able to say everyone is welcome in the church. And I think for those who cannot do that, they just need to recognize that those are their opinions, and they're welcome to their opinions, but at the same time, we, church, need to be a truly welcoming place, and we need to welcome everyone. And that's always challenged. I mean, just when you think you've become a welcoming church, somebody comes in who defies our comfort, and we have to rethink again. All right, wait a minute. Now what does it mean to be church, and what does it mean to be truly welcoming? And I think in my almost seven years here, for me personally, that happens almost weekly. But it's a good thing in the long run. It's a good thing. All right, so before we get to the topic of what does the United Methodist Church say, there's just some background information that I need to share. The General Conference is the conference of the United Methodist Church. It meets every 4 years. It's the primary legislative body of the United Methodist Church. It's the only entity authorized to speak officially for the church. It comprises not less than 600 or more than 1,000 delegates, divided equally between clergy and laity. Customarily meets every 4 years to determine legislation related to connectional matters, but can meet at other times for special call sessions, as is the case later this month. So the General Conference is something you need to know about. The number of delegates elected from each annual conference. So we are part of the New England Annual Conference, comprising Methodist churches in most of New England. Delegates elected from each annual conference shall be based on the number of clergy members in each conference and the number of members of local churches in each annual conference. Why is that important?
It tries to make it so that one person represents a certain amount of people. So it's basically equal.
It is, because it's representational and it's intended to be equal. The reality, though, is that in the United States, Methodism is most strong in terms of numbers in areas of the country that tend to be more conservative. And in places like New England and the Northwest, where there's more progressive ideas and openness to progressive thinking, our numbers are smaller. So the number of delegates coming from progressive areas of our country are fewer than the number of delegates coming from more conservative areas of our country. And so that becomes a challenge in terms of any agenda item that might be viewed as being more progressive. It's going to have an uphill fight to be passed. Add to that we are a global denomination, and so we have many African countries where in many places homosexuality is still condemned legally as it's against the law. And so you have delegates coming from countries where for them it is a struggle to how do we bear witness in our own context to something that is viewed as illegal. So a challenge, to say the least. The Book of Discipline. The Book of Discipline of the United Methodist Church, often just called the Discipline, outlines our denominational law, doctrine, administration, organizational work, and procedures. It is the General Conference that makes the determinations that are then reflected in the Book of Discipline. They're meant to bring them, hop in the office and pick it up in a moment. And then there is what is called the Book of Resolutions of the United Methodist Church. It's a collection of pronouncements on issues approved by the General Conference and which are currently valid. It contains not only the resolutions and policy statements passed by the most recent General Conference, but all such statements still considered the official position of the denomination on the subject. So we have Book of Discipline, Book of Resolutions, both important to us. So, what does the Book of Discipline say about homosexuality? I just want to go through all of these, and then we're going to come back. So, I would like just for you to be thinking, as you read and hear, what are your initial reactions to? What's your sense of what you're hearing? So paragraph 161G of the Social Principles of the United Methodist Church, and the social principles appear both in the Book of Discipline and in the Book of Resolutions. We affirm that sexuality is God's good gift to all persons. We call everyone to responsible stewardship of this sacred gift. Although all persons are sexual beings, whether or not they are married, sexual relations are affirmed only with the covenant of monogamous heterosexual marriage. We affirm that all persons are individuals of sacred worth, created in the image of God. All persons need the ministry of the church in their struggles for human fulfillment, as well as the spiritual and emotional care of a fellowship that enables reconciling relationships with God, with others, and with self. The United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers this practice incompatible with Christian teaching. We affirm that God's grace is available to all. We will seek to live together in Christian community, welcoming, forgiving, and loving one another as Christ has loved and accepted us. We implore families and churches not to reject or condemn lesbian and gay members and friends. We commit ourselves to be in ministry for and with all persons. Is there someone else who would read? Just jump in, please.
All persons set apart by the church for ordained ministry are subject to all the frailties of the human condition and the pressures of society. They are required to maintain the highest of standards of holy living in the world. The practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. Therefore, self-above practicing homosexuals are not to be certified as candidates, ordained as ministers, or appointed to serve in the United Methodist Church.
Somebody else?
Paragraph 341.6, under the category of unauthorized conduct of clergy, states, ceremonies that celebrate homosexual unions shall not be conducted by our ministers and shall not be conducted in our churches.
Someone else?
Paragraph 613.19, under the category of the responsibilities of the annual conference, states, to ensure that no annual conference, board, agency, committee, commission, or council shall give United Methodist funds to any gay caucus or group or otherwise use such funds to promote the acceptance of homosexuality or violate the express commitment of the UMC not to reject or condemn lesbian and gay members and friends.
And this basically says the same thing, but in this case, it's in reference to the General Council on Finance Administration, that no money should be spent to either further promote acceptance of or to reject or condemn lesbian, gay members and friends. One more? Go ahead.
Paragraph 2702.1b, under the category of chargeable offenses, the statute of limitations states, a bishop, a clergy member of an annual conference, local pastor, clergy on honorable location, or a diaconal minister may be tried when charged with one or more of the following offenses. Practices declared by the United Methodist Church to be incompatible with Christian teaching, including but not limited to being a self-avowed practicing homosexual, or conducting ceremonies which celebrate homosexual unions, or performing same-sex wedding services.
All right, we'll go back. Just what are your sort of initial sense of things, Kelly?
Something that struck me as kind of disturbing, and way back into the first paragraph when they're talking about, yes, humans are sexual beings, but, the only, recognizable one is a heterosexual marriage, but yet nothing was stated about consent. And I'm sure that they were trying to imply that monogamous or heterosexual marriage is by default consensual. To not even delineate that, I think, is doing a disservice, because there are sexually abusive marriages out there between a man and a woman. To not have that aspect of it, I think, was kind of disturbing, especially given the climate that we're in today with Me Too movement and starting to recognize what a problem sexual violence is. To not state that, I think, is a big disservice.
Linda?
Well, if I'm being nice, it's like a contradiction of thought. You start out saying that we're all sexual beings, and you say, but it can only be this kind I'm not being nice, it's sanctimonious hypocrisy.
Steve?
I view it as part of the covenant that man has with God. I mean, man, capital M, has with God, and also carries over to marriage and so forth.
Any other initial responses? Christy?
I think it's remarkable that given the whole collection of things that we as Christians teach, that this is the one teaching that we highlight over and over and over again. And it strikes me that we do this in a way that targets one of the smallest populations in the church.
Yeah, so minority population in the church gets a big part of the book of discipline. Nani?
May I, well, this is like a question and a comment. Okay, so how come that they are minority? How did they come to be minority? Is it not some of these that have made people not to be attracted to the United Methodist Church? Because certain practices are like, or certain rules and regulations are like saying, you don't belong here. And so indirectly, we are looking out for membership. We want more people to come to our congregation, but we are putting roadblocks on having more people to feel free to come. So, you know, I've been in prayers, praying that the kind of waves that have been in the Roman Catholic Church for years, not even now. Maybe it's now that it's catching fire here. But right way back in Nigeria, it was even the priests that started questioning some of the practices. And it became open. Newspapers, media, they were really bringing to the limelight. How are we being hypocrites? So I've been praying that the hypocrisy that may be is what is putting away many people who would like to come to the Methodist Church should be addressed so that no group will be seen as minority.
Let's see, Paul and then Jerry.
I would add cowardly to Linda's description of it. And the hypocritical part to me that just really strikes out is that they're specifically mentioning homosexuality, but ignoring all the other sins that, fornicators, which means anybody having sex outside of marriage, premarital sex, they don't bring that out as being incompatible and we can't have clergy doing that and all that. And cheating on your taxes, that would be a sin also, and that's not mentioned. So it's just, I don't know.
Even this year?
Yep. I think nobody knows what's going on, so it's a freebie this year.
Jerry.
Shirley and I had the eye-opening experience exactly 1 week ago right now of attending the Covenant Methodist Church service and this exact same discussion in outside of Daytona Beach, Florida. And it was really an eye-opener because it was a discussion just like this. It was being led by a woman who was at the early stages of just trying to get acceptance, not approval, but just acceptance. And there were a handful of people, mostly male, but a couple of females, that were just adamant, this is my Bible. I will accept anyone, but I won't deviate from what the Bible tells me. And it was just nothing you hear here, but it was just a very surprising experience to experience that kind of thinking, so adamant and so forceful. It's just a different point of view. It's going to be very hard. I mean, very hard to get those people
So
to.
you have a taste, a little bit of what it is like in other parts of the country.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And of course, that whole conversation around the role of the Bible, the authority of the Bible, but coming at it from a different perspective than we have come at it. And of course, what you heard there, you could hear in the Methodist churches, pretty much any part of the country, but especially in parts of the country that we
Yeah.
tend
Well,
to.
that's what everybody says, but we experienced it.
You experience it, and it's valuable to experience it because it puts it in a different perspective. So just some, my own sense of things, is the sense that the United Methodist Church wants to have its cake and eat it too. That we want to, on the one hand, say that every person is a person of sacred worth, and yet, although we don't come right out and say it, clearly we imply that some people are slightly less of sacred worth if they happen to be homosexual. So, and you see that, for instance, in the funding, on the one hand, we could not choose to use church funds to support an organization our annual conference could not use. Local churches can. Our annual conference could not choose to use church funds to support an organization that is advocating on behalf of gay individuals. But at the same time, an annual conference could not use church funds to support a anti-gay organization either. So you've got both, but there's just the sense of we're trying to have it both ways, and the reality is it's not working. It's not working. The other thing that comes across to me so much is the punitiveness of our legislation around homosexuality, especially towards those who feel called into ministry and who are told, should go back and hold on 1 second. I'm getting there. All right, so this is the statement. The practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. I know when I hear that, I say, what does that mean? What does that mean? Therefore, self-avowed practicing homosexuals are not to be certified as candidates, ordained as ministers, or appointed to serve in the United Methodist Church. So if you parse that, a person can be homosexual, but as long as they are not self-avowed, I'm not sure what that means either.
They're still in the closet.
Don't ask, don't tell.
Well, I think it's meant by don't ask, don't tell, but sometimes I wonder if they think you should be ignorant of your sexual orientation, totally live without acknowledgement of it. Practicing homosexual. So what is a practicing homosexual?
That's right.
Not yet experts.
Going on to perfection? All right, there you go. So we have terminology that is just very unclear. But the reality is that we've had so many of our clergy who are homosexuals be brought to trial because someone has said he or she is a self-avowed practicing homosexual. And many, unfortunately, have had their ministerial credentials removed because the church trial, has found them to be self-avowed practicing homosexuals. What the criteria is for that, your guess is as good as mine. I've never been to one of these trials. I don't know that I could could bear it, but, you know, that's where it stands. So we can say to a person, you know, you are a person of sacred worth, you are a person who is homosexual by orientation, and as long as you're not self-avowed and practicing, you can even be ordained in the United Methodist Church. And we have many gay clergy in our denomination, and Christy and I could probably shout out 10 or 15 names off the top of our heads.
But we won't.
But we won't. Absolutely not. But, you know, and they are individuals who, for the most part, are not in the closet. They don't choose to live hypocritically. They choose to be open, even if they are not shouting it from the rooftop. And fortunately, in our conference, there's a certain safety and security, but the reality is, if anyone were to bring charges against these individuals, they could find themselves going through a church trial. And it's a very punitive thing. And then, you know, to say to a clergy person like myself, you may have a gay couple in your congregation who you as a church have received as church members, who you have affirmed as people of sacred worth, whose gifts are valued by your church. And you can treat them the same as you treat everybody else, except if they want to have their union blessed by you, or if they want you to conduct a ceremony that in any way acknowledges their covenant relationship, or if they want to be married as a couple. And to me, that is just saying to me that as a clergy person, I have to treat you all differently, and I don't like that. I don't like that at all.
I was just thinking that last sentence, if you change that from are not to could be, you would have to read something like that. Therefore, only self-loathing homosexuals are to be certified as candidates. I mean, and what does that say? Because that's, in fact, how I read that sentence.
Or only hypocritical homosexuals who choose to not be self-avowed, not be practicing. Yeah. It's not a very pleasant place, in my mind, that we find ourselves in. But it is the reality. It's been the reality for quite some time.
Please, may I say something about that Christian teaching? The Christian teaching aspect, you know, say incompatible with Christian teaching. And I'm just making this comment because even as individuals, I know that in my conversations with my fellow Africans who are still holding on to as it was in the beginning, so it is now, and so shall it be forevermore. That I use the opportunity of such conversations to point their attention to the fact that recent studies are going on, even in Christian teaching, because it's equivalent to what some of us experience as students, that some teachers will bring in the same notes they used 30 years ago to come and stand in front of students and be rattling like this is the gospel truth. Unknown to them, some students have even researched more and are ready to debunk some of the things they are standing there saying. So I think when we talk about incompatibility with Christian teaching, maybe the conference should also take time to update everybody on what the current Christian teaching is all about and how far there has been researches about this Bible, because the Bible is not a stagnant water.
I mean, your point is well taken. Christian teaching is not stagnant. It's changing all the time because our understanding is changing all the time, including our understanding of the Bible and our understanding of what science and medical research adds to the conversation of our experience as we've heard the stories. So Christian teaching is always changing on all topics, not just on this topic. Kelly.
I just wonder almost how do they define Christian teaching, because maybe this is just me being oddball out there, but when I look at Christian teaching, you know, teaching of Christ, and what did Christ teach us? Love everybody, and I have yet to find a list of exceptions anywhere in any of Christ's teachings in the Bible, and so I just, you know, whenever I hear someone talk about Christian teaching or biblical, like what are they pointing to as their source? Because if we're gonna, you know, try to live as Christ lived, and to be discriminatory is what I find incompatible.
Well, for as long as this language has been used, there have been those that brought proposals to each general conference, just asking the church to be more honest, and more honest by admitting that we are not all in the same place, that not all agree that Christian teaching, that homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. And that's where, you know, from every 4 years, for a while, the votes were getting closer and closer and closer, and it looked like there would be a turn of a real change, but in the last couple of general conferences, the vote has gone further, more conservative. Cindy.
And as a clergy, what is your understanding of why? What is the thing that holds them back? Just you. For me, it sounds like money, and it sounds like comfortableness. You know, that's the only thing I can think of.
I don't know I could say any one thing, but I think for the most strongest voices in favor of maintaining the status quo around homosexuality are folks who see us in a culture war. And they see this is sort of their stake in the ground, where they've said, things have just changed too much, our culture has changed too much, this is as far as we're gonna go, we're not going any further than this. And they've been pretty adamant about it, pretty adamant. And we have a variety of organizations, the Good News Movement, which is a movement within the United Methodist Church that is, you know, really in favor of pretty much going back about 50 years. Okay, let's go back 50 years. You may want to check, I haven't gotten everybody, I don't believe. Some late comers need to be added.
Is it a majority vote or a two-thirds majority? Two-thirds?
It has been a majority vote, yeah. Charlie?
About changing in attitudes and phrasing and different things. There's a thing going on about changing the Lord's Prayer. The line about lead us not into temptation. Christian teaching, Jesus would never lead us into temptation. So how should that be rephrased so it doesn't sound like Jesus might lead us into temptation, and we're asking him not to. So,
well, the reality is temptation is not the best translation of that word in the Lord's Prayer, but because it's been part of it since 1611, when it was translated that way in the King James Version, that's what we've kept. But it really is, don't lead us into a time of testing, a time, you know, so quite frankly, the way we recite the Lord's Prayer is not very faithful to the Greek in the New Testament. But we say it that way because that's the traditional way of saying it. I want to go back now and just say, just a reminder that prior to 1972, there was no language in the Book of Discipline pertaining to homosexuality. And we talked a little bit on our first session about some of the things that were happening in the late 60s, early 70s that brought about this desire to now have language that was exclusionary and language that would sort of set the stake in the ground around homosexuality. So that was 1972 when it was first stated that homosexuality is not compatible with Christian teaching. And the other thing that was added in 1972 was the statement, we do not recommend marriage between two persons of the same sex. That's how it was worded in the 1972 Book of Discipline.
Do not recommend.
Do not
When I read
recommend.
that first, I thought, that's kind of an odd word to.
Well,
Who are they?
yeah. Well, in all of this legislation, the wording is odd in so many places, in so many ways. 1976 is when the 3 statements banning the use of church funds to promote homosexuality. Okay, so the 3 statements banning funds to promote anti-homosexuality were added at a later time, but 1976, those 3 statements were added. 1980, there were no changes. What was put in 1972 and 1976 were kept. 1984, and I hope you sent out an article maybe 3 weeks ago from a bishop who was a part of the General Conference in 1984 and who was responsible for the statement that was adopted as the standard for ordained clergy: commitment to fidelity in marriage and celibacy and singleness and self-avowed practicing homosexuals are not to be accepted as candidates, ordained as ministers, or appointed to serve in the United Methodist Church. So I forget what his name was. Maybe Christy, you can remember. No. Anyway, he was bishop. He was part of this General Conference. He was the one who came up with this wording in 1984. But he has since moved to where he does no longer avow that.
Is that Bishop Ives?
What's that?
Is that Bishop Ives?
No.
No.
I'll have to. You got check back your emails for a few weeks ago. I sent you the article. And it's a sermon in which he says, here's how I got from 1984, where I came up with this language that is now part of the Book of Discipline, to where today it was part of a reconciling congregation tool, I think, Tuell, Bishop Toole. And so it's really helpful to see that here's a bishop who was very instrumental in having this language added to the discipline, who now, we're talking only 15 years later, was in a very different place. And I think that was true for so many people, both bishops and clergy and lay members in the church during that time period, where there was this movement of understanding and acceptance that has continued, but continues to struggle as well. 1988, we added the words, we affirm that God's grace is available to all, finally. And we commit ourselves to be in ministry with and for all persons. 1992, there were no changes. 1996 added a definition of self-avowed practicing homosexual. That's the definition. A declaration that ceremonies to celebrate homosexual unions shall not be conducted by United Methodist clergy or in United Methodist churches. 2000 added, we implore families and churches not to reject or condemn their lesbian and gay members and friends. That took a while too. And then 2004, delegates agreed to a statement of unity, which says, as United Methodists, we remain in covenant with one another, even in the midst of disagreement, and affirm our commitment to work together for the common mission of making disciples throughout the world. Delegates reaffirmed the denominational position, though, so they kept everything the same but reaffirmed or affirmed a covenant of unity. 2008, delegates approved a new resolution to oppose homophobia and heterosexism. And in 2012, 2 items stating Christians have different opinions about homosexuality were not approved, leaving the current language intact. And then in 2016, and we'll talk more about this starting next week, was when the bishops of the United Methodist Church, Council of Bishops, put forward, well, it was brought actually from the floor of General Conference, that the bishops take leadership in addressing this, and out of that came the decision to have this special session of General Conference that will be beginning in about a week and a half, that will be looking for a way forward, a way to, on the one hand, become a more just and accepting denomination, while at the same time maintaining the unity of the denomination. That's the whole thrust, really, of this special session of General Conference. We will learn more about the various proposals that are being put forward starting next week. Charlie?
Are these Sunday school classes going on in the entire church, the southern districts? And
I suspect they're going on in many places and probably have been for some time. Whether they're going on in all churches, I don't know. And, it wasn't something that someone said to me, oh, by the way, you should be doing something in the church. I could have chosen to do nothing, and nobody would have said anything one way or another. The reality is we probably should have been addressing this sooner, but personal reasons, I decided to wait till now.
Is it one national conference, or is it a bunch of regional conferences?
So so the United Methodist Church, consisting of conferences in the United States, Puerto Rico, Africa, Europe, Russia, South America. So it is a global conference that will take place in St. Louis. So, but it is
So it
every
is one
annual
conference,
that
global attendees.
Yeah, global attendees.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it will very likely be streamed. They do tend to stream them on the internet, so you do have the ability to watch this. That is not always an easy thing to watch, and yet I think it is important to witness
Yes.
this, even if you can only do it for a little while, either for reasons of you have other things to do, or because in practicing self-care you have to walk away. But it is, I think, good to have people looking at this while it's going on and praying.
So if you go to umc.org, you will find various information about the plans, but also the information you would need to know how to stream it for yourself.
What's the date of that?
So
23rd,
I
does it
believe
start?
it is the 23rd through 26th or something like that.
And is the vote by secret ballot, or is it, you have to raise your hand and?
I'm not sure of the answer to that, Jerry.
The voting mechanisms can change depending on what's
Yeah.
going on, and depending on what equipment is available in various locations.
Right,
Because it's
right.
a lot of people voting.
So next week, we will, so the United Methodist Communications just last week did a wonderful panel where they had one individual from each of the 4 plans speak regarding their plan, and then have questions between themselves. It's well over an hour, but we're going to watch part of that next Sunday as our class. And then I'll also have some summaries of the plans. The Way Forward document itself, if anyone would like it, is nearly 100 pages, so I'm not going to send it to you unless you ask. The other thing I discovered, and Christy would appreciate this, Tiffany Steinwert, was she a student when you were there at the
She was one of my instructors when I was there.
One of your instructors. I came across her doctoral thesis, which is available online, well over 400 pages. But she addressed the ecclesiology behind, the churchiness behind this whole conversation around homosexuality. And if you really wanted to get into it, it would be a wonderful place to go, and I could send you that too, but.
She's brilliant,
She
and
is
she is
brilliant.
cited everywhere. You know,
Yeah.
people use this particular body of work in all kinds of work, and she's still out there doing amazing work.
Yeah, she's a familiar name, and is ordained in our conference, and has served churches in our conference, but
She's at Stanford right now.
Stanford.
She just left Wellesley College and went to Stanford, but she's been all over the place.
Yeah, pretty remarkable individual. So there's a lot of information out there. We'll try to share summaries of it with you so that we won't overwhelm everybody. But there's more to be had if you really want to get into the more information. And we'll do some, watch some of the panel discussion there. You won't have to listen to it. Any last comments?
Thank you for making effort to update us, because we would have probably been lacking in knowledge, but you are helping us to advance.
Well, I've had a number of people approach me since my sermon last week to say we really didn't understand where the United Methodist Church was at. And it's really disturbing to me to discover that. And I think, it's not one of those things that we talk about a lot. Maybe we should have talked more, but when people understand where the United Methodist Church is at, there's a level of discomfort and upsetness that is very appropriate in my mind anyway, about where our church is and how discriminatory and unjust we have been for over 40 years now. So, but let us pray. Oh God, we come to you as a people who struggle about many things. Help us to be truly understanding, though, of what it means to love our neighbor as ourselves, and what it means to love our neighbor who happens to be homosexual as ourselves. And help us as a denomination to be able to find that place where we can truly be just and inclusive of everyone. And help us, oh God, to be able to hear and converse with each other in ways that are helpful, in ways that move us forward. Oh God, I'm sure that not everyone in this room is necessarily in the same place, and we pray that anyone who might be feeling that they're struggling at this point would know that there is grace and that they can indeed share their opinions and ideas as well. And help us, oh God, to truly respect each other, to move in ways that grow your church as a body of Christ in this world. We pray now in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Thank you all, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.